Welcome to the deep dive.
Our mission? Well, it's pretty straightforward.
We take your source material, could be articles, transcripts, research papers, and we dig in.
Yeah, we pull out those vital nuggets of knowledge, the key insights you need to know.
It's about getting you up to speed quickly with maybe some surprising facts thrown in.
And hopefully just enough personality to make it stick.
Exactly.
So today we're diving into one specific source. It's pretty rich. The transcript of a recent White House event.
Okay.
And this wasn't just, any old event. It was focused squarely on health in America.
Health in America, all right. What aspects?
We're talking some really concerning statistics on chronic disease, particularly in children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the first report from a brand new commission they set up, plus some pretty significant proposals about prescription drug prices. Big stuff.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is basically to walk you through that transcript.
Right. What were the main points?
Sure.
What numbers did they really hammer home?
And, what did the people speaking there actually emphasize? What felt most important to them?
Let's unpack it, starting right at the beginning of the event.
So the transcript kicks off with some opening remarks, framing the context.
Yeah, including this assertion that the U.S. is, quote, the hottest country economically right now.
Hottest country. Okay.
Apparently, this was based on feedback from 3 Middle Eastern rulers cited in the transcript. They found the turnaround amazing, apparently, over just a few months.
Interesting framing. And they also mentioned the setting, the White House itself.
Right, a note of appreciation for the location.
And this whole event was really built around an initiative called Make America Healthy Again, or MOSHA.
MOSHA. And the transcript presents this as sort of an offshoot or evolution of Make America Great Again.
Right, related branding. How did they describe MOSHA's purpose?
It was called an unstoppable coalition.
Yeah.
Parents, doctors, citizens, all aimed at protecting kids, getting rid of dangerous chemicals in food, toxic stuff in the environment.
And delivering the facts. That was part of the description, too, clearly tying into specific political language.
Definitely. And central to all this was the first report from the Presidential Commission to Make America Healthy Again.
The MAHA Commission, when was that formed?
Just 4 months before this event, according to the transcript. And this first report focused specifically on childhood health, framed as a crisis.
And who's actually there? The transcript mentions attendees.
Yeah, a range of people, government officials, cabinet secretaries, the Secretary of Health and Human Services was mentioned by name.
Okay.
And it's interesting, the transcript specifically notes that one official, identified as a Democrat, got singled out for praise.
Really?
Yeah, for doing a very good job, even though, according to the speaker, appointing that person initially caused a lot of heat.
Huh. So highlighting maybe some cross-aisle work, or at least acknowledging it within their own framing, shows the political undercurrents.
Exactly. Which brings us to the actual findings, the core stuff from that MHA Commission report on kids' health.
And the word they used repeatedly, according to the transcript, was alarming.
Alarming. Terrible. Yeah. Strong language.
Okay, let's get into the numbers. This is where it, really lands. What did the report state?
So get this. Over 40% of American children, the report claimed, now have at least one chronic health condition.
40%.
And since the 1970s, childhood cancer rates,
Yeah.
they've soared. In some cases, the transcript says by nearly 50%.
50% increase in some childhood cancer. That's staggering.
It is. And obesity rates. Another stark contrast presented. In the 1960s, less than 5% of kids were obese.
Okay, baseline 5% back then.
Now, according to this report, over 20% are obese.
That's a 4-fold increase, basically. A huge shift.
Massive shift, yeah. In just, 50, 60 years?
And was there one condition they focused on most heavily?
Autism rates. That got a lot of emphasis in the transcript. The claim was a few decades ago, it was 1 in 10,000 kids.
1 in 10,000?
Now, the number they gave was 1 in 31. And they noted it had recently been 1 in 34, so even that figure had ticked up.
1 in 31? That's an incredible number compared to 1 in 10,000.
The reaction reported in the transcript was pretty blunt.
Oh.
Something wrong.
Understandable reaction to those figures.
And a pledge was made, not stop until we defeat the chronic disease epidemic in America.
Okay, strong commitment stated there.
And one more thing on the autism rate. A very specific claim was made that the increase has to be artificially induced.
Artificially induced. Okay, that's a significant claim. We should definitely note that's the specific viewpoint presented in the transcript.
Absolutely. We're reporting what was said at the event. And the report, as they discussed it, didn't just list stats. It claimed to examine root causes.
Root causes for why kids and maybe the whole population are getting sicker.
That's the idea. And they listed three main ones in the transcript.
What were they?
Ultra-processed foods was one, over-medicalization and over-prescription was another. And the third was widespread exposure to potentially toxic chemicals.
So food, medicine, environment, broad categories.
Right. And the administration's stance, as presented, was pretty defiant, saying they will not be silenced or intimidated by the corporate lobbyists or special interests.
Demanding the answers from the health system, from industry.
Exactly. So based on all of the alarming stats, the claimed root causes, they announced some specific actions.
Okay, what steps are they taking, according to the transcript?
They said they're phasing out 8 of the most common artificial food dyes
8 specific dyes.
and ending what they described as the most serious conflicts of interest at the FDA, regulatory moves.
Got it. Anything else?
Yeah, a big one they highlighted was approving SNAP waiver requests from states
SNAP, that's the Food Assistance Program. Waivers for what?
to stop basically taxpayer money in the SNAP program being used for junk food and sugary drinks. That was the framing.
Okay. Restricting SNAP purchases. Which states?
Nebraska was mentioned as the first. Then Indiana and Iowa approved just before the event. And they expected more states to request this.
And they made a point about this being new.
A very bold claim, actually, said this specific action had never happened before under Republican or Democrat administrations, presented as a unique achievement.
Okay, so framing it as groundbreaking policy.
Definitely. And looking ahead, the commission said they'd spend the next 80 days building on this report.
To create what?
A roadmap, they called it, for bold and transformative public health reforms. So this first report is just step one.
It's interesting, though, reading the transcript, it wasn't just one voice laying all this out. Different people offered their perspectives.
Absolutely, it adds layers. Like the Secretary of Health and Human Services spoke.
What was his take?
Well, according to the transcript, he credited the leader, the president, with vision, courage, standing up to industry. Used very specific language.
Wait, what?
Called him a populist president. Said he's on the side of the middle class, the working class, the poor. Directly linking health policy to this political identity.
Right, making that connection explicit.
And he called the report itself a historic milestone. Claimed it was the first time the entire federal government got behind such a strong public health position.
A unified government stance, he argued.
Yeah, and he linked everything together. Good economics, good environmental policy, good public health, good industrial policy. Said you can and should do it all.
Interesting synergy argument. How else did he frame the report?
As a call to action for common sense.
Common sense. Like what examples?
Things like, the obvious link between ultra-processed food and chronic disease. Screen time affecting mental health.
Okay.
Prioritizing exercise and healthy food before jumping to prescriptions or surgery.
Right.
And being more skeptical of corporate-funded research versus independent studies, stuff designed to sound like, well, common sense.
And he apparently explained why certain groups, moms, he called them, support the administration.
Yeah, citing, according to the transcript, the bravery to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And wanting solutions through innovation, not nanny state regulation. That specific phrasing.
Got it. And there was a personal anecdote.
Mentioned his uncle tried something similar years ago, but it never got done, adding a bit of historical context or frustration.
Okay. Who else spoke? You mentioned Secretary Brooke Rollins.
Right. The transcript says she highlighted her personal connection, a MAHA mom herself.
Reinforcing that identity.
And she circled back to the SNAP waivers, mentioned the states again, underlining their significance, and she linked it all to American farming.
Farming, how so?
Called Farmers the Original Environmentalist.
Yeah.
Connecting health initiatives back to agriculture.
Interesting theme emerging there. Anyone else notable mentioned?
A few others briefly. Vince Haley talked about digging into root causes with no sacred cows, suggesting a real willingness to challenge things.
Okay, an investigative approach.
Dr. Mehmet Oz. Yeah, the TV doctor spoke about the moral and financial reasons to tackle childhood health. Mentioned Medicaid costs.
Right, the cost argument.
And he framed this whole effort as the first big push like this since Medicare and Medicaid were created back in '65.
Positioning it historically?
Yeah.
What about other doctors?
Dr. Marty McCaffrey. He made the point that the U.S. is great at, high-tech medicine, fixing acute problems, but has had a 50-year failure in population health. Argued for shifting from sick care to proactive well care.
A system change argument.
Yeah. And Dr. Jay Bhattacharya expressed shock, basically, at the idea from the report that kids might live less long or healthy lives than their parents.
It's a really grim prospect.
But he countered, saying, that's not inevitable. We can reverse it with excellent gold standard science, a more optimistic, science-driven take.
Okay. And Senator Roger Marshall?
Drew on his MD background, mentioned epidemics. He sees diabetes and pregnancy, youth mental health, obesity, prescription drug issues.
So reinforcing the core problems from a practitioner's view.
Exactly. And he also connected health back to soil health and farmers. That theme again.
Fascinating how that agricultural link kept coming up. Okay, so that covers the childhood health part. But you said there was another major topic.
Completely shifting gears, yeah.
Yeah.
The second big focus in the transcript, prescription drug costs.
Always a huge issue. How is it presented here?
Very, very directly. The transcript reports the issue was framed as the U.S. paying way, way more than other countries.
How much more?
Sometimes 10, 12, even 13 times more, according to the speaker.
13 times. Wow.
Yeah, and the language used was pretty blunt. Terms like the U.S. getting screwed, taken advantage of.
Of course.
Said other nations were laughing at the U.S., effectively making Americans subsidize the whole world for drug R&D because they pay so much less.
Okay, that's the problem framing. What was the proposed solution?
Demanding most favored nations, pricing, MFN status for drugs.
Most favored nations? Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the U.S. would pay the absolute lowest price that any country pays anywhere in the world, period.
The lowest price globally, how would they determine that?
Examples given were like taking the lowest price across the entire EU, or just finding the single lowest price from any individual country, even, quote, ones nobody has heard of.
So find the rock bottom price, and that's what the U.S. pays.
That's the proposal. And the claimed savings. Huge.
How much?
The transcript states potential reductions of anywhere from 70% up to 89% on drug prices.
70 to 89% reduction. That would be massive.
Massive. And they contrasted this sharply with a previous effort mentioned from an earlier term.
What was that?
The speaker admitted they'd achieved only a 1/4 of 1% reduction back then, which they initially bragged about before realizing, how tiny it was compared to the price differences they were now highlighting.
0.25% versus potentially 70, 89%. Big difference.
Yeah.
Did they acknowledge this would be tough to implement?
Oh, yeah. The transcript notes acknowledgement that the drug companies are, quote, the most powerful lobby in the world. Billions spent. Tremendous power over politicians.
So they know it's a fight.
Absolutely. But the message was basically, we're doing it anyway.
And timeline. When would this start?
Immediately. That was a key demand reported in the transcript. Not delayed for years, which they called a common tactic to kill reforms. Immediately.
Okay, immediate implementation. What if other countries or companies push back?
They anticipated that. The transcript mentions the expectation that other countries and Big Pharma will fight it.
And the response?
Pretty aggressive, as described. Potentially using trade action?
Trade action, like tariffs.
Like stopping imports, yeah. The examples given were cars, wine, liquor, other goods from countries that resist implementing this lowest price for the U.S., using trade leverage.
Wow, okay. That's using a pretty big stick.
It is. And finally, on this point, a very direct order was given to the officials there, including Oz, Marty, Jay, Senator Marshall.
The same group involved in the Health Commission stuff.
Yeah. They were told, according to the transcript, to be very, very tough and get this done fast.
And if they don't?
The transcript includes the line that if they fail, they'd be fired.
Fired. Okay. That certainly signals determination or pressure.
Right. Though one official, Dr. Oz, did apparently respond right after that.
What do you say?
Mentioned they'd already had promising talks with companies and suggested maybe there's an upside for companies if they cooperate with U.S. government support. He kind of framed it differently, like maybe foreign prices were artificially low, just as U.S. prices were artificially high.
Interesting nuance there. Maybe hinting at a negotiated path rather than just pure confrontation.
Possibly.
Oh.
Or just trying to smooth things over after the firing talk.
Yeah.
Hard to say just from the transcript snippet.
Okay, so wow. We've really covered a lot of ground just from this one event transcript.
We really have. I mean, this deep dive took us through quite a journey, a major administration event focused on health policy.
We looked at those, frankly, shocking statistics presented on childhood chronic illness.
Yeah, the 40% number, the cancer rates, obesity, the autism figures.
And the root causes they identified: processed foods, over-medicalization, chemicals.
Right. And then the specific actions announced, like the food dye phase-out and those SNAP waivers, which were framed as totally unprecedented.
And then that whole second piece on prescription drugs, demanding the lowest global price, the most favored nations approach.
And threatening trade action to enforce it immediately. It's a very aggressive stance described there.
So the transcript really gives you a window into how this administration is framing these huge health challenges.
Exactly. The specific initiatives under that MAHA banner, the problems they're prioritizing.
And the really strong, sometimes confrontational language used to talk about both the problems and their solutions.
Yeah, words like screwed, lobbyists, fight, fired. It's direct.
So here's something to think about as you process all this information from our deep dive today.
Consider how events like this one, where you got specific health data mixed with really strong political framing and these bold, maybe even controversial policy proposals, how does that shape the wider public conversation about health?
Yeah, and thinking longer term, how might these approaches, whether it's tackling childhood chronic disease this way or trying to force down drug prices like this, how might that actually impact health outcomes and costs for you and your family down the road? What are the potential ripple effects?
Lots to chew on there.
Definitely.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. We hope digging into this transcript offered you some valuable insights into the perspectives and plans laid out at this particular event.